Thank you for zooming in with us today. On behalf of the Sandbox Centre team, welcome to our Experts in Residence session, Communications and Creativity. For those who haven't been acquainted with me or the Sandbox, I'm Mackenzie. I'm one of the 6 members of the Sandbox team. We're located downtown Barrie and online to connect people and their ideas to business resources on their journey to success. If you haven't yet attended one of our Experts in Residence sessions, we're happy to have you with us today. Across a wide variety of different expertise, we're offering monthly free expert advice sessions to all businesses across the region in order to help support with your journey to success. If you're interested in learning more about what our Experts in Residence program has to offer, feel free to head over to our website, sandboxcentre.com, after the session and check it out under programs. Today, we are thrilled to have experts Shona Welsh and Jan Bailey of Ovation back. For those who haven't gotten a chance to know Jan and Shona at our past sessions, Ovation provides workshops that are highly interactive online and in person, and Shona and Jan have helped countless individuals transform their ability to connect to their audience and deliver authentic and meaningful messages with impact. Today, they will be walking us through how to deliver a dynamic pitch with their 4-step process. And we know some attendees today have pre-submitted their questions, but for those who have some questions throughout the session, please don't be shy. Use the Q&A feature that's at the bottom of the screen, and we'll be monitoring this throughout. We'll try to get to answering as many of your questions as possible towards the end of the session. A quick thank you to all of our community partners for supporting with the sharing of our events, and of course, a huge thank you to Ovation for being here today with us. So without further ado, please welcome Ovation as they help you supercharge your pitch. Over to you, ladies.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Mackenzie. We're very happy to have all of you here, especially those of you who are new to our presentations. It's all good. It's all good. So there, we wanted to, as we get the screen all organized here, I'm very excited because I'm at Sandbox this morning, which is great, and we've got a whole brand new setup here. So I've got a new camera. So if you see me looking at I'm looking down, I'm looking at the wrong camera because I've got an external camera this morning. It's very exciting. So new technology is always fun to work with. We are very happy to have you here because it seems as though many of us, well, many of us, all of us, are having to shift our pitching ability a little bit. We're shifting onto camera and we're having to sort of really be conscious of selling ourselves. And most of us find that whole selling word is a little bit of a hard one to swallow sometimes. So we are here to help you a little bit this morning, talk about pitching, and that really it's just about taking you, and in any kind of a speech, it's about ramping your energy and you up as you present your product, your business, or your service. So we're going to talk to you today about our 4-step process. We'll give you a little overview here as we go through. There are 4 steps, obviously creating a pitch map. We'll go through these in detail a little bit as we go on. So just a little overview for you. So creating a pitch map is our first step. Acting like you don't know. I know that sounds a bit strange, but don't worry, we'll explain that to you as well. Step number 3 is put your, yes, you are reading that correctly, worst foot forward. I know, don't worry, all will be revealed. And step number 4, of course, is shoot for the moon. That one should be pretty straightforward. So really, we're going to talk to you about a couple of different ways to think of pitching. Now, please keep in mind that we are not going to go in depth into something that you would do, say, for example, with a Dragon's Den or a Shark Tank. In that kind of a pitch, it's much longer process. You've got a business plan, financials, spreadsheets, data, a little more data driven in that kind of a pitch. This is more about your elevator pitch for you, your product, your business, but it's something that you can build that other pitch for. Okay. So first of all, always, always, always begin with the end in mind. Same as if you're writing a resume, same as if you're writing a speech. Now, what do you want the audience to know, to do? And you have to think about what do you want them to walk away with on the back end. So always begin with writing down 3 questions. How your audience thinks and how your audience feels and what your audience wants. That's absolutely the key. You have to know what they are looking for. So begin with that. Okay, now I would like to talk to you a little bit about how you can think about your speech, kind of like a 3-act play. Okay, so this is Act 1. You need to think about what was your audience's life like before your product or before your course. Okay, Maybe they have had a series of issues, a series of concerns, a series of problems. And then you have to take that in their language. That's the key, in their language. So, oh, I used to hate the way I looked in the mirror wearing my clothes, or, oh, I hated the way I felt when I went shopping for clothes. Oh, I never felt like I had enough energy. So in their language, in their mindset. So that's before. Now, what's Act 2? Well, Act 2 is, guess what? Things changed. Why? Because you came along. You have this fabulous product. You have this fabulous service. You have this fabulous, maybe it's a course. And things changed, okay, in that second act. That's the change act. And then the third act, what happens? Ta-da! Everything is amazing after the fact, right? Your product saved that person. Your product transformed that person, transformed their business, whatever it is. So the idea of a pitch in this kind of a format, or this kind of a framework, we'll call it, is that you compressed all of your experience. So this is how you need to think of your business. You took all of the trial and error, all of the mistakes, all of the money that you spent, maybe time and effort, and you have compressed it into your product, your service. And you are now offering that to your client. And that's where the ta-da comes in. So in Act 3, you offer them this fabulous service. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's kind of the 3-act play, if you think of it in that way. And it's really a neat before, my service, and then the after effect. Okay, makes sense? I hope so. Okay, excellent. So let's move on a little bit, and we will talk a little bit now about the actual 4-step process to break it down a little bit and help you think of your pitch in a different way. And Shona gets to tell you all about it.
Great, thanks, Jen. And sorry, we were having some control of the screen issues, so it was going back and forth. I think we've worked those out. All right, so step 1 in the Ovation 4-step pitch process is creating a pitch map. Now, for those of you that are familiar with mind mapping, this is exactly what it is. It's mind mapping. For those of you who aren't familiar with mind mapping, it's okay. I'm going to explain it. So the idea is internal to your team. Before you're going into pitching a client or pitching investors, you want to create a pitch map, which is essentially a plan of your pitch and also, by extension, your brief elevator speech. So basically, your pitch map is going to involve 3 things. First of all, it's a visual display of your story on one page, and you can build it out, and we'll show you an example in a minute. Secondly, we want to talk about something we call the Twitter test headline. It's not literally a Twitter headline, but it basically means keep it short and simple. And again, we'll give you an example in a second. And then the third point is you really don't want to have any more than about 3 points. Usually your pitches are going to be between 10 and 20 minutes, usually not more than that. Sometimes you'll get half an hour, but often it's not more than 20 minutes. So you've got to really think about what are the key messages we're going to focus on. So let's take a look at a pitch map, and we're going to use Ovation's pitch map as an example. Now we're going in actually to a big pitch situation next Friday for a huge RFP, and there are 3 finalists. And one of the things that is important to know when you get to be a finalist in that kind of a bid situation is that reality is all 3 of those companies could do the job. So you want to really think about what you're going to do to articulate your message, and then the rest of our steps will tell you how to wow them. All right, so the first thing you want to do is start with a circle or an oval in the middle of a page. I've put it up top here because we've got a PowerPoint screen, but the idea is you're going to build all kinds of circles around this. You start with your Twitter test headline for your business, your product, your service, whatever it is, and this is what we have arrived at. Ovation teaches people to change minds every time. So we believe that particular Twitter test headline, in other words, it's really short and gets to the point, actually has a lot of information in it. We teach people how to change minds, which actually, alludes to the fact we teach you how to be persuasive. And we're pretty confident that every single time you're going to be effective, whatever your goal is. And so that is our overarching, statement, simple Twitter test headline. Then you want to think about 3 key points, as I mentioned on the previous slide, that actually describes how you fulfill this promise. So Jan and I talked at length about what's the most important thing we do that's the foundation of actually achieving this, teaching people to change minds every time. And the most important thing we do is build confidence in people. There's nothing like getting up on a stage and learning how to be a public speaker to build your confidence, and you come out of it and it extends to all areas of your life because now you're confident in that. What else can you do? Okay, so that's our first of our point under our Twitter test headline. Second point, we thought, okay, next to building confidence, what's the most important thing about our service that we offer? And it's this. We get people to learn by doing. It's really quite funny because people will show up at our public speaking workshops and we have them up and speaking within 10 minutes and everybody's in shock. And we're like, well, it's a public speaking course. I mean, we could spend hours telling you everything we know about public speaking, but our mantra is this: words don't teach, experiences do. So of course we have some teaching elements, like about 15 minutes, and then you get up and you try it. So learning by doing is a really critical component of building confidence and teaching people to change minds every time. And then finally, our third, and we talked about this a lot, what's our most important point that's third, not necessarily in that order, is people actually get to trust themselves. So in the act of building confidence and trying stuff out and learning by doing, we encourage people to trust themselves. Now, before I go on with our pitch map, I'd like you to grab your phone, as I'm going to grab mine, and go to your clock function and pick stopwatch, because I'm about to demonstrate for you how this little pitch map can actually be your elevator speech, and you can do it in 15 seconds. So I'll just give you a couple of seconds to get organized, and then I'll show you how we build out the pitch map a little bit more. So I'm going to start timing myself. So let's say we're in a room with a client or an investor, and their first question is, so tell us a little bit about Ovation. I know you're a public speaking company, but what do you actually do, and how do you do it? Here's our answer in 15 seconds. We at Ovation teach people to change minds every single time. We do that in 3 key ways. First of all, we build confidence in our participants. They learn by doing, not lecture. And finally, most importantly, they learn to trust themselves. 15 seconds, 0.49. That is your elevator speech. You can teach your entire staff to do this elevator speech, so it is a consistent message every single time. All right, so that's your elevator speech, that's your intro. Let's say you're in a 20-minute pitch situation. You want to build out on each of these 3 points with another 3 points. Now, again, I come back to the more complex your product or service, the more you really want to map this out on a piece of paper, because you want to get into, this is where you can get into details, data, stats, storytelling. So for us, we use both data and storytelling. I'm just going to use one example, the building confidence example. So what would be the first point underneath building confidence? Well, we want to talk about, the first thing we start with is, how do you manage nerves? You can't be confident if you're nervous. So we talk a little bit about what are the things we do to manage nerves and why that's a foundational piece in building confidence. Our next point is, and we do that through using a lot of improvisational theater techniques, because managing nerves does not get a bigger test than when you're asked to speak about something you have no idea you're going to ask about it, you don't know anything about the topic, and you got to figure out how to think on your feet. And so that's how we build confidence. So when you get to a prepared speech, you're thinking, I got this. If I can do improv, I can do a prepared speech. And then the third point under that is, guess what? We have a lot of fun doing this. So you actually are learning how to be a better speaker, and you don't even know what's happening because you're having so much fun. So we'll back this up with anecdotal stories. For example, we talk about, the transformative power and what's happened in people's lives. And a statistic that we give is, for one of our really big public speaking programs we do with a client in the Middle East, 85% of our graduates get promoted to leadership positions within a year of doing this program. Now, it's not this program alone, but a lot of them will tell us that it gave them the confidence to be able to sell themselves better in the organization. So that's an example of the story you would tell in your pitch. Now, I'm not going to go on and give you 3 more examples under learning by doing and trusting yourself. But again, you build out your pitch map just like this. It becomes a visual representation of your company, and your entire staff can actually learn how to do it. So the idea, though, is to keep things simple, and Jan's going to take us into step number 2 on some things how to keep it simple.
So just a reminder as we go along, and just a refresher, we're kind of talking about 2 different styles of pitch. So even when you're doing an elevator talk that Shona mentioned earlier, that her 15 to 20 second, we call that an elevator pitch. And then what she built out there was a much longer pitch, like the one that we will be doing for an RFP, and like many of you are doing as well. So remember, they're kind of 2 different styles that we're talking about right here. So step number 2, act like you don't know. Kind of makes no sense, doesn't it? No, I know. But what happens is, as we get really good at what we do, or as we get really comfortable with our product, we tend to forget what it was like to not have that knowledge. So we speak at a different level, right? You're speaking with a knowledge up here about your product, and the people that maybe you're talking to have a knowledge level down here. So we're trying to figure out that differential a little bit and talk the same language. So what you're trying to do is, no matter how complicated or how many times your pitch has been done or you've done it, you need to find the connection with people. You need to make it easy to understand. So let's talk a little bit about the Titanic. I know, don't worry. We know you're not going to sink in your pitch. We're very happy that you're going to make it. Has anyone ever heard of the Titanic? I suspect you have. Has anyone ever seen any documentaries on the Titanic? I bet you have. There have been, I'm sure there is some statistic that I don't know about how many documentary series there have been done about the Titanic. So you can imagine that when James Cameron came along and said, I'm going to do a movie about the Titanic, movie studios said, well, yeah, James, it's kind of been done, buddy. But so what he had to find is a way to help them see it in a new way, relate to it in a new way, and get studios excited about it. So how he described it, and some of you may have heard the story, how he described it was a way that everyone could relate. And he did it in 1 sentence. It is Romeo and Juliet on a ship. Okay, now how beautiful is that, right? And immediately you have a picture in your mind. So if you can find that 1 sentence that relates to your audience, that 1 line that connects to their reality and to yours, it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. Okay, so that's a nice little tip. Now we'll go on to, now you're trying ultimately to create a shared reality. And we talked a little bit about that learner mentality. And what that means is remembering what it was like to not know. So that's how you learn to speak to your audience, because there is nothing worse. And I know we've all seen it because we've all done it. You're in a pitch and you feel yourself talking and talking and talking and talking, and it just seems like it's getting worse and worse and worse. So you're trying to create a shared commonality, almost a common reality with your audience. And remember a time when you didn't understand it as well as you do now. Okay, it's totally key. It's absolutely essential. Now the last part in act like you don't know. Thank you very much, Albert Einstein, for this quote. Because this one is really hard. It's hard to do. If you can't explain it simply, you don't know it well enough. And I know that's crazy because you're thinking, oh, it's my product, it's my business, it's my course, whatever it is. Yes, I know, but the people that need your services don't know it as well as you do. So you need to be able to really clarify and really simplify. So you're kind of always doing this. Whenever you're doing a pitch, you're starting with this great idea that you've got, and you're going, and trying to focus it and make it more and more clear. So one of the things that we do, Shona and I work with people in all kinds of industries that we know nothing about. I mean that in the nicest way, Shona. We're not engineers. We're not professional accountants. We're communication people. If you want to talk about writing essays and speeches, we got you. But there are some things that we don't know a lot about. And so when we work with these people, it works really well because we get to say, yeah, I don't understand that. And they have to simplify it. And then we say, yeah, I still don't really get that. And they have to simplify it. So it's a really great exercise. So one of the things that we do when we work with people is we say, go home and explain it to your 10-year-old. And if you don't have a 10-year-old, explain it to the 10-year-old next door. But the point is that you have to come up with different language. You have to come up with different analogies. Analogies are wonderful things. You have to come up with ways to describe your service or your product that is very simple and very easy to understand. Now it is, I'm not kidding. It's a challenge. So I challenge all of you to try in that 15 seconds to describe your product, your course, your service in a very simple manner that even a 10-year-old could understand.
Yeah.
Go for it.
So one of the most common comments we get, we work with a lot of engineers as it happens, and they have to do a 10-minute speech by the end of the program, and they show up with 75 slides with all kinds of data, right? And we're like, yeah, you got to lose 65 of those slides. And the most common complaint in pitches is that people give too much data, too much information. That is the most common complaint. And investors are like, oh, I'm sorry. Was there something interesting you were talking about? Yeah.
And we call it getting into the weeds, right?
Yeah.
And we've all been there, because you hear yourself and you start trying to explain and trying to explain and trying to explain and trying to explain, and it just goes from bad to worse. So clear, concise, simple. Go for it.
Okay, that leads into a special situation that you want to put your worst foot forward in. I know, again, that sounds ridiculous. All will be revealed. Now, with investors in particular, but sometimes with clients as well, we found this. Sometimes you're dealing with an audience that's either skeptical of what it is you've got to sell, or they're hostile. It makes me think of America's Got Talent or The X Factor. Simon Cowell has had enough of the crappy acts all day, and it's the last act coming on, and you can just see him roll his eyes, and he's looking for that act to blow them away. Well, think about being in a client situation or an investor, or even in a bid situation. You've heard lots of presentations. How, if you've got a skeptical or a hostile audience, are you actually going to get across to them the importance of your product and what you're selling? Well, sometimes the best thing to do when you've got a skeptical and hostile audience in particular is to start with the challenges of your product or service. This is putting your worst foot forward. In other words, you're not trying to sell them on what's so wonderful about it. They expect you to do that. But if you start with the challenges, it can be very convincing. Let's just take a simple example in the form of British Rail. Now, before I tell you this story, I need to tell you that British Rail no longer exists. All the rail systems in the UK were privatized a long time ago. But way back in the day, when British Rail was still operational and competitors were starting to come on the market, they realized they better up their game. And so, they wanted a better image of British Rail being projected to the UK public. So they put out a bid for a new advertising company to come up with a new campaign, and they shortlisted 3 companies. 2 of them were the big advertising companies, really well known. Everybody's heard of them in the UK. And then one little upstart company that they liked their proposal because it was kind of off the wall and creative. So they thought, we'll give them a shot. They'll be a finalist. Now, this small company knew it was up against the giants. So what they wanted to do was use this concept of putting your worst foot forward to actually win the bid. This is what happened. The small advertising company phoned up the execs at British Rail, and they said, look, we know it's usual for us to come to you to do our bid presentation, but we'd like to ask you to make an exception and have you come to us because we've got something special planned for you. Okay, well, we picked them, the execs at British Rail thought, because they were off the wall. Let's do that. So on the appointed day, they showed up at the advertising company's reception area. They checked in with the receptionist, and she said, have a seat. They'll be out to see you in a few minutes. Okay, that's great. So they sit down. They start looking around as they're waiting, and they realize the reception area is filthy. There's dirt in the corner. There's crumpled up used coffee cup with lipstick prints on them. The receptionist looks like she hasn't even brushed her hair. There's paper strewn all over the place. So they're sitting there and they're thinking, oh my gosh, like what kind of a company is this? Well, they're sitting there for 10 minutes. They're sitting there for 15 minutes. They're sitting there for 20 minutes, and still the advertising people hadn't come out to greet them. Well, now they're getting irate. So they go up to the receptionist and said, look, we've been waiting 20 minutes. Come on, giddy up. Oh, I'm really sorry. They'll be right out. Well, they ended up waiting half an hour. Now, I don't know if I would have the intestinal fortitude to keep my client waiting half an hour. Nevertheless, by the time the advertising folks came out, the British Rail executives were a little irate. And what the advertising executives said was this: listen, you've just experienced what every single customer of British Rail experiences every day. Trains are often half an hour late. The stations are filthy. How do you feel? In other words, words don't teach, experiences do. They put British Rail's worst foot forward to prove to them that they needed to really up their game. And guess what? That advertising company actually won the contract. Now let's take it down to your own company and your own challenges and maybe things that aren't so great about what you know about your product and services. We all have challenges. So as an example, I want to talk to you about a company called Babbel. Now, again, Babbel no longer exists either, and I'll tell you why in a few minutes. In the late 1980s, there was a Hollywood power couple that ended up getting pregnant at a later stage in life, and they were looking for resources online to help them in their parenting efforts. Couldn't find them, so they started their own website for online magazine called Babbel. Some of you who are my vintage might remember it. Anyway, it was this great online forum. It was super, super successful. And about 4 years into it, they needed an influx of about $3 million to, finance their expansion plans. So they met with a group of investors, and they knew that the investors had heard all kinds of similar ideas. And they decided they were going to put their worst foot forward and start talking about all the things that were problematic for Babbel to get this $3 million. Now let's talk about why that was effective, because it was. First of all, when you talk about what's maybe wrong with your product or service, or certainly a challenge, immediately it disarms your audience. They expect you're going to sell them, and you're not. You're telling them stuff that maybe is a problem. And when you are a pretty smart, powerful, wealthy investor, that's pretty disarming, because you expect people to sell you. So what happens in their brain? They shift from being self-defensive, don't try to sell me on stuff, I'll decide. They shift their brain into problem solving, because after all, they're investors because they're smart and successful business people. They move into thinking, okay, here's how I would solve that problem. So already you've shifted their perspective. It creates confidence in you. They feel like you're not trying to snow them, that you're actually being honest, and therefore you look wise and insightful. They feel you're trustworthy. And guess what? They develop a more favorable assessment of your product and service when you start with your challenges. Now, again, that's only for skeptical or hostile audiences. You can see the research on this in Adam Grant's book, The Originals, but it's quite fascinating. And we've actually used it a couple of times, and it works. By the way, Babbel got the $3 million from the investors, and 2 years later, Disney bought out Babbel for $40 million. So just goes to show, sometimes putting your worst foot forward can be effective, which actually leads to step 4. When you don't have to put your worst foot forward, what do you want to do?
Well, I'm thinking that the return on that $40 million in 3 years, that's pretty nice return on your pitch. I like the sound of that. Yes, shoot for the moon. And this is really what we're all doing. It really is what we're all doing and trying to do. And I think that part of it is letting your personality come through, and it really is important. And Shona and I reiterate this in everything that we teach. And if you've seen us in a webinar before, we talk about this all the time. You have to allow your personality to come through as you shoot for the moon. And I know that I know that no matter where you are and what you're pitching, your personality is going to come through. Now, you don't have to wear hot pink high heels for your personality to come through, but you know what? Go for it if that's what you want. Even if you're on Zoom and you've got your shoes on, that's a great idea. Whatever it is that makes you feel powerful when you're pitching and makes you feel confident when you're pitching, go for it. But above all else, allow your passion and your enthusiasm and your belief in your product to come through. You have to know that you cannot please everyone. You cannot. Not everyone is going to want your service or your product. Not everyone is going to want to invest in your service or your product. But remember, it just takes one. And Richard Branson, you all, well, presumably you've all heard of him, the Virgin founder. Pretty well known for his irreverence and his kind of bucking of the system. And one of the things that he says is that you have to allow yourself to be unapologetically disruptive. I love that. Unapologetically disruptive. Now, disruptive does not mean disagreeable. Disruptive means you disrupt the status quo. You have to step out and say, this is why I'm good at this, or this is why my product is great, and here's how it can change your business or your life. Go for it. We've all heard the expression that no publicity is bad publicity. Kind of the same idea. You really don't want to be bland. You don't want to be forgettable. So that means that maybe you need to polarize some opinions. Maybe you need to walk out of the room after your pitch and have the people who are left, you want to have them discussing it and saying, well, I thought this and I thought that. How great is that? Because now you've had an impact and you have sparked a discussion. That's what a pitch is all about, is how can you start a conversation? Remember, you don't have to get all of the facts in that one pitch of whether it's 15, 20 seconds or whether it's 20 minutes. You don't have to inundate them with everything. You just have to be intriguing enough, good word, intriguing enough, so that they want to continue the conversation. And Shona said that earlier when she said, you come in with 75 slides. Oh my gosh, no, it's too much. It's too much. One of my favorite quotes, to be honest, I don't know who said it, I really should find out, is that a confused mind either says no or does nothing. And either of those things are bad. They're bad after a pitch. A confused mind does nothing, or a confused mind says no. And you don't want those things to happen. So get rid of all those slides. Be you and be memorable. Make sense? Sometimes tricky.
Let's go back to, sorry, Jen. Let's go back to the example of the big pitch we have coming up next week. We are going to do improv exercises. Now, there are going to be people in that audience that will be very uncomfortable with that, because we find a lot of people that hire us are hiring us to teach other people. They're not actually the victims. I mean, the students themselves. So we actually do this, and there's a lot of people that love it. And then there's a lot of people you can tell they're really not wild about this. Nevertheless, we walk out of there and they remember us. Remember what I said, when you reach the finalists and kind of the bid presentation, and there's 3 of you, any one of you could do the job. So your job is to be memorable. And if you polarize opinions, that's okay too, because you'll definitely be memorable. What have you got to lose? All right, so let's just go through what we've been through today as a reminder. First step in the Ovation 4-step pitch project process is create a pitch map. And again, you can build that pitch map, 15-second elevator speech. All of your staff can do that really, really easily. And that visual representation helps people get really straight on what your Twitter test headline is, your 3 key points, and then you build out from there. And remember, the more complex your product or service, the more you really want to draw this map, because you can get sucked into all the details and you want to make sure you stay with the highlights. Step number 2, act like you don't know. Present something in a new way. Romeo and Juliet on a ship, right? Titanic's been done to death. But that whole central story of Jack and Rose, that appeals to everybody. That's the emotion part. Act like you don't know. See it with new eyes. Explain it to a 10-year-old. Step number 3, put your worst foot forward when you have a hostile or skeptical audience. This is your best bet. and start with the challenges. You're going to disarm them. They're going to trust you. They're ready to listen. And finally, step 4, shoot for the moon. It's okay to be a little controversial. You will be memorable. Again, I don't know if I have the intestinal fortitude to wait, make my clients wait half an hour in a dirty reception area. Nevertheless, it's an option. One last thought before we take some of your questions. It really doesn't matter if you're doing a pitch or any other speech. Always remember that people make decisions emotionally first, and then they use all the data and logic to back up what they think was a logical decision. It wasn't. So you always want to marry the heart with the head in your pitch presentations. Appeal to the emotion, appeal to the logic and data, and you're going to have your audience in the palm of your hands. And I know you have a bunch of questions that you sent previously, and you may have some that have come up right now. So I will leave, I'll send the word is hand it back to Mackenzie for any questions you might have.
Hey everybody, thank you so much, ladies. That was amazing. And I love just the way that you mapped out everything from the pitch map to the whole process. It was awesome. So thank you so much. We do have quite a few questions, so let's just jump right into them. Let's see here. So the first person is asking, what is the best pitch length exactly? I know you mentioned the 15-second elevator pitch, but what would be your best recommendation?
Well, often it's your client or the investor that tells you the length of it, but you usually don't get more than 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes. And ideally, I don't think you do, even if you have a choice, you don't want to go longer than that, because the way the brain works, it works in cycles of 20 minutes. So 20 minutes is about that outer limit in terms of, this is my opinion, in the length of your pitch, because you can engage them. You're not killing them with details. It forces you to stick to your pitch map and not, get down in the weeds. Jan, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to say that there are all kinds of different, I think we're all pitching all of the time, right? It's persuading in its essence. And so if you are in the proverbial elevator, standing 6 feet apart and wearing a mask, nonetheless, if you're in an elevator and you've got 15 seconds, so you need that version. Then if you're at a social gathering of some kind, maybe you actually have a minute because you've met someone or you've been introduced to someone, so you have a minute. So you need to have these kind of bracketed or dedicated, if you will, pitches. So you've got a really, really short one that's maybe 1 or 2 sentences. Then you've got that medium length one that maybe you do the 3-act kind of play style. And then you have the longer one, which is one that you've built out with a pitch map. So really you have several on the go. It's kind of like having a resume, right?
Okay. Perfect, thank you. Somebody's asking, how do I make potential clients feel they need my service?
Well, first of all, you can never make anyone feel anything. That's the frustrating part of it, right? But you really have to, it's all about that relatability that we talked about a little bit earlier. And I think that, remember, if you're passionate about it, it's infectious. If you believe, it's infectious. And you want to use all of these techniques that we've outlined to begin to relate to your audience. So that's the first thing that pops into my mind.
Mm-hmm. I think also to add to that is always watch what's going on with your audience. Like a lot of times, when they're starting to feel like they're being sold. So back off and start to ask questions to them, and then that gets that conversation going.
Remember, you're trying to solve a problem. Your product or your service or your course, whatever it is that you're offering, that's a better way to say it, your offering is meant to solve their problem. Well, if you don't know what the problem is, how do you know if your product can solve it? So Shona's totally right. Ask questions.
Yeah, and we always start by asking questions. We don't go in and go, okay, here's what we do because they invited us for a meeting. We start by saying, all right, tell us a little bit about what you see as the challenge.
Where are you at?
Yeah.
Perfect. And that really relates to, somebody's asking also, how do you deliver a pitch without sounding too salesy? So that kind of relates well to that. But if you have anything to add without sounding too salesy, by all means.
I was just going to say, imagine going to the doctor And you walk into the doctor's office and the doctor says, oh my goodness, the pharmaceutical company was just here and they've brought this fabulous product and I'm going to give it to you. And you say, but I haven't told you what's wrong with me yet. Well, yes, but I've got this great product and it's really going to be great for you. Well, you leave. So, you know, think of it in that way. You need to find out what the story is before you start pitching the product.
Absolutely.
And I think just to back that up, don't worry about that. Worry about having a conversation. And there's 3 key sort of steps we use in thinking about creating your speech, your pitch that we didn't talk about today. And the first one is addressing personal impact. So we've already talked about asking questions and clearly understanding where they're coming from and what their issues are. And we drill this with our clients. Like, for example, we'll role play. Okay, you're a real estate agent, you're trying to sell me a house, and we'll keep throwing stuff at them, objections, to prove to them that the first thing they should have done is ask us what we wanted. So first of all, thinking about personal impact. Secondly, you only ever have 2 goals in a presentation, in a pitch, dealing with a client, with an investor, and that's to create awareness of your product or service and to create understanding about how it may solve their pain points. And that's where you need to, pardon, I don't mean to sound rude, that's when you need to shut up. You know, appeal to personal impact, understand their pain points, create awareness and understanding, and then be quiet. And the reason for that is the minute you start trying to convince them how to feel or what to decide, people resist. They feel like you are trying to sell them something. So be confident with your passion, addressing their particular impact needs, create awareness and understanding, and then have a conversation about how they feel about that rather than having them feel like they're pressured.
What would you say is the most relevant element of a successful pitch? If you had 100 successful or 99 successful pitches, what would be the most relevant element to all of them?
I think a lot of what we've just said, the most relevant element of your speech, wow, English is my only language, is connecting with your audience, is that connection. So think of it as having a conversation rather than you standing up and giving a presentation. And we tell our clients this all the time. Imagine you're sitting in a coffee shop across the table from a friend and just be relaxed and natural and be yourself. So I think the most important thing is to have that conversation. And then the second most important thing is not kill them with details. I'm sure Jan's got something to add too.
Well, I think that I know that because I can hear what everyone is saying. I can hear they're, oh yeah, Shona, that's really easy for you to say because you're a speaker training and you're used to being relaxed in front of other people. So we get it, right? We get it. You're totally nervous, you're totally wound up, and you're feeling desperate, right? You're feeling anxious. You're feeling like, I really want this business or this contract or this money or whatever it is that you're pitching for. So we totally get that. So practice this art of being simple and trying to find the simplicity so that you can relax, because it is, you're in a situation where your nerves are, you're ramped up. And I would add to what Shona said, energy and enthusiasm and passion. Allow that to come through. Sometimes we get so caught up in being businesslike and having all the facts straight that we forget to be ourselves, and we forget to be excited about why we created this product. Why did you create this thing that you are now pitching? Because you were excited about it. Yeah. Remember that excitement. And sometimes the easiest way to do that is to start with a smile when you walk in the room, and it sets the tone for the rest of it.
Yeah, with some of our clients, we've, just recently, we've said to them, are you excited about your product? Well, yeah, I've spent 30 years of my life on this. And we're like, yeah, it doesn't show. So let that really shine through.
Remember that.
That's awesome. Those are some great tips. And I know even for people who might be delivering pitches now virtually, it's interesting that they might feel that rush or wanting to just get everything out quickly and want to get to the point because people are on Zoom 24/7, but we still are looking for that human connection and realness and enthusiasm and passion. So those are some great tips.
Very true.
I think you definitely mentioned it before, but maybe you could remind the audience, what's the best way to end a pitch? Somebody has asked.
Well, there needs to be, there needs to be a call to action. And for most of us, especially those of us who are uncomfortable selling or persuading, better word, it's difficult to say, and if you could give me $1 million, that'd be really great. Right? So it's difficult, that kind of end note, but that really is what it is. Way back at the beginning of the slides where we talked about how do you want your audience to leave as you begin with the end in mind. What do you want them to know? What do you want them to feel? And part of it is, what do you want them to do? Because if you don't tell them what it is that you're looking for, then they just say, wow, that was a really interesting presentation, thanks. And that's kind of the end of it. So you do need to say, are you asking for money? Are you asking for time? Are you asking for a referral? Are you asking for, I don't know, I can't think of anything else. Shona, got anything? Are you asking for their business? And you need to specifically tell them what it is that you are looking for at the end of your pitch. And we keep wanting to say speech and pitch. That's why we keep saying spitch, I think.
That's
so.
a new word. It should be a word.
Yeah,
It's not a word, but it should be a
For presentation purposes, it's easier.
word. Well, and I think also, sorry, Jen. Yeah, I think what happens is people do a lot of work on having a compelling opening, and people get that, like, oh, my opening's got to be strong and bring people in, and people generally have some ideas about that. They often forget that your ending needs to be as strong. So the same rules apply to your ending as they do for your opening. So, you know, compelling openings are things like a startling picture, a startling quote, a story, you know, something like that. End in the same way that has your call to action embedded in it. And people will also remember that as well. So you should have an opening hook, we call it. You should also have a closing hook.
You don't want to be that one, because we've all seen it. We've all heard it. We've probably all done it, where you go at the end, you go, so yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's it. That's very common. Yeah.
Right? And we've all heard that. You don't want to be that person.
Perfect. Thank you. Somebody's asking, what is the best way to get the message across when it challenges egos and needs to be experienced to be believed?
I'm hoping the British Rail example gave you some ideas about the experience. And so, you know, I'm going to go directly to this bid presentation we have next week. The best way to get our message across about how effective we are in our public speaking programming is to have them experience it. You know, so we're going to get them up doing improv. And like we said, it's, you know, not everybody's going to love that, but they're going to go away with that feeling of, oh yeah, that's exactly what our leaders need to challenge themselves. So wherever you can give people an experience versus trying to sell them, you're going to get around their egos, because showing them is much more powerful than talking about it. Jen?
Well, I was going to add to that I get that sometimes that's difficult. I mean, I want you to experience, naturally, of course, I can't think of it as an example as soon as I say that, but for example, some things you do have to, how are you going to get people to experience a massage, for example? Well, okay, we can't do that in a group of people, but so you have to try and find something that they can relate to, that they can feel the feeling or remember the feeling or go, oh yeah, I know what that's like. Well, my product is kind of like that, or my product gives that same benefit, or my product, right? So you want to kind of, you're trying to build a bridge. If you're not able to offer them a direct experience, you want to be able to build a bridge to something that they have experienced or something that they are familiar with. And that goes for complicated products or services, and that certainly goes for things that are, you know, difficult to experience in the pitch room.
Well,
Did that make sense?
Yeah, also to add to that, we deal with a lot of CEOs, et cetera, and, you know, a lot of them are lovely people, and a lot of them have really huge egos, and one of the most common comments they make to us is, well, I'm already a very good speaker. I don't really need any help. It's for my, you know, for my team that we need it. And of course, we know right away that the vast majority of time, yes, indeed, they do need that help. So we'll, you know, have lots of exercises in our back pocket to kind of show them that maybe you don't got this. Maybe you could actually benefit from this as well. And quite frankly, improv exercises are the fastest way to do that. So we have these little things in our back pocket, you know, depending on the client we encounter and how they greet us. And we found it to be quite effective. And we've definitely seen some aha moments in the big egos that we deal with. So again, you develop a repertoire of things you can try out that seem like they'd be appropriate in that moment. And only you can decide for your product and service what that would look like.
For sure.
Well, and Shona, sorry, that last comment on this question, Mackenzie, really.
Absolutely, go for it.
The last thing that I would like to add to that is, and Shona touched on it, was laughter.
Yes.
There is nothing as disarming to a big ego as laughter. If you can get the room to soften with a smile and maybe a laugh, and I'm not talking about telling jokes. I don't tell jokes in pitches or ever, because I'm terrible at them. I really am terrible. And I think that many people are. So I'm not recommending that. But if you can tell a story or an anecdote or something about your journey that gets the room to laugh, it really does open up a bridge and really does get by those egos. So it's a brilliant technique.
Absolutely perfect. That's so helpful. Thank you. And Eleanor is asking, what is a great tip if you are presenting via a recording and you can't see your audience or engage with them?
You need to look at the recording of the workshop at Sandbox on effective video conferencing. But, you know, I mean, I'm all joking aside and seriousness. It's hard on video conferencing. And one of the first things you can do, and again, we can't go into, you know, all the tips right now, but right now I'm looking directly into the camera. I can't see Jan, I can't see Mackenzie right now. I know they're sort of off in my peripheral vision. I can't see anybody in the audience, but you think I'm looking at you because I'm treating the camera like a person. So one of the best ways you can connect, whether you can see anybody or not, and in fact, it's better if you can't see them, because you'll have the tendency to look over. Like I'm looking at Jan right now, I'm looking at Mackenzie. You want to look right into the camera, and that has that sense of connection. So for example, recently working with a client who they're interviewing for a new executive director. And one of the things that was just driving us crazy is our inability to connect with the people we were interviewing, because they were like looking everywhere. And, you know, some of them I felt like saying, are we keeping you from something? But anyway, again, one of the easiest things to do is just look straight in the camera and it looks like you're looking at them. So there's a point of connection. I know Jen's going to add a couple of things.
No, I actually was going to add, because there are camera tips, certainly. And I agree, most people are uncomfortable with the camera. It's hard to get used to speaking into a little black circle. It really is. But I do know someone who has cut out a picture of a human, someone that's friendly. Maybe it's a friend that you're accustomed to, and they've taped it in on top of the camera just so that they feel like they're actually looking at a human. It's a great technique. I mean, it sounds silly, but it really is a great technique. But what I was going to add was, how cool is it that there's nobody else in the room and you get to create your reality? So you get to imagine that all of those people behind the camera over there are thrilled with your presentation. They're smiling, they're laughing, they're engaged, they're connected. So if you can create that in your head as you're looking at the camera, oh my gosh, your presentation will be brilliant. Okay, it really will, but you have to find that imagination. So see those people behind, see them embracing your product, see them enjoying your presentation, and go for it.
That's awesome, thank you. And Eleanor, I can definitely send you the resource of a past blog we have. You can look on our website and we have that recording there. It was a fantastic session. We have one last question here. Any suggestions on refining the pitch? Should we be recording and watching, or practice in the mirror? All the good stuff.
Jan says no in the mirror. I'll let her go first.
The trouble with the mirror, though I don't think it's a bad thing to practice your facial expressions in the mirror. I really don't. I think it's important, and this is going to sound really strange, but I think it's really important to get to know your own face. And you're saying to me, well, Jan, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Of course I know my face. Yeah, no, you don't. You don't know. And because we've all had this happen. People will say, well, what's wrong with you? And you'll say, nothing, I'm just sitting here. Well, the look on your face, well, what look? No, your resting grouchy face, right? Is that the face you woke up with this morning? Well, what do you mean? I'm just sitting here. So many of us don't know what our face is actually doing when we're listening or when we're participating. So the mirror is brilliant in that regard. But the way to hear yourself, hear the pace of your talk, see the expression, see when you need to smile a little bit more, that you're not smiling a little bit more, or not enough rather. All that is completely evident when you record it and you play it back. And you know what? Yeah, your voice really does sound like that. So you need to get used to it. Okay? Get over yourself, look at the recording and learn from it. It's brilliant. It's a brilliant way to grow as a presenter.
Yeah, it is painful. Definitely. It's painful for us to watch ourselves, never mind you. But one thing we find happens with our clients is we're trying to break them of a habit. Like maybe they say or 32 times in 2 minutes. But like whatever it is, we're trying to break them up. A lot of times they don't necessarily believe us. So we record them and then we play it back and they go, oh. And that's the moment they really start to transform. So yeah, record yourself, as painful as it is, drill with your team, take each other's feedback, practice, 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 and then you will feel totally confident when you walk into your pitch.
Amazing. We have one last question here before we finish up. Somebody's asking, any examples of good ways you've seen humor used in pitches before that you could give some advice around?
Well, I think both of us do this really well, and it's always a really great way to connect is self-deprecating humor. We make fun of ourselves, right? We tell stories about horrible times. Like I tell this story about one time I was doing a keynote speech and there was a big vase of flowers on the stage. And as I was walking through, that little voice in the back of my head was, don't go near that vase. Don't go near that vase, because I was not born with a gene known as grace, right? So I am this clumsy, flailing around, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I so focused on the vase. Yes, indeed, I had actually kicked it over off the stage. It crashed and it broke into a million pieces in the middle of a keynote speech. And people, the cringe factor in that, people can relate to, because we've all had whatever moments like that in our lives, and they laugh nervously, thanking God that it wasn't them and it was you. So I mean, that's just one example, but go with the moment, and there's often little bits of humor we can connect with people on. But I find self-deprecating humor is very disarming, and people tend to like you when you do that.
I would only add to that, that was what I would have said as well, but you pay attention to yourself in the next week and see where you find humor and see where you use humor, and just kind of build on that naturalness. I mean, I know we talk about practice, 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 and we really do mean practice, 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 practice. But in that, once you're really, really comfortable with your pitch and you've got the simplicity down, you've got the call to action down, you've got all the components, then you can begin to relax and be yourself and allow that natural humor, that natural smile, that natural presenter to come through. And so if you know where you're comfortable bringing some light or some happiness or some humor to a presentation, then you can allow that to start to happen for yourself. So it really is about, the old practice makes perfect.